Hello, I'm Sarah K. Byerly, and I serve as the Assistant to the Executive Director at Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. And today I wanted to share a little bit with you about how we see the common soldier of the Civil War portrayed in Stephen Crane's novel, The Red Badge of Courage. Now, this is one of the reasons that I really appreciate this novel because it gives us an idea through a story about what it was like to be a Civil War soldier, a private in the ranks. Now, I do want to clarify that not all privates had the experience of Henry Fleming, who is the main character in the book. And as you've already seen in the book synopsis, he runs away. So we don't want to give the impression that all Civil War soldiers did that or had that part of the experience. But just the descriptions of battle, the lack of knowledge that the soldiers had, these are really important things to keep in mind when we're looking at battles and studying Civil War history. So let's dig a little deeper into the common soldier experience and some of the examples that we see of it in the novel. So first off, and I kind of already touched on this a little bit, is just the idea that the soldiers in the ranks usually did not understand at that time and place the big picture of the battle that they were fighting. So we're fortunate as we look back as researchers, as preservation enthusiasts, as armchair historians, we have our books, we have our maps. And so we can look at the Battle of Chancellorsville and see how it unfolds. And we kind of already have the spoiler alerts of how it's going to end and which units are going to end up where. Most of the time, the Civil War soldier did not have that experience at all. He knew that he was fighting, but he only knows as far as he can see or what he has heard. And that comes through really clearly in the novel. Henry Fleming, the main character, sometimes called the youth or the boy, he is aware of what he sees. And then he feels like he is an enlightened soldier because he overhears some officers talking. And toward the end of the novel, when he's returned to the regiment and is going to fight with them, he actually overhears some officers talking about a charge that his regiment is supposed to make. And he hears that it's probably going to be disastrous and they're probably going to take a lot of casualties. And he feels like he knows more than all of his comrades around him. And he does in the case of the story, but that really reflects what a lot of privates in the ranks experienced when it came to knowing and not knowing about what was actually going on in the battle situation. Now, right in the opening chapter of Red Badge of Courage, we get a really amazing picture of a young man enlisting. And we get an idea of his motives for enlisting, and then also the impact that his departure is going to have on the home front. So young Henry Fleming thinks that war is a thing of the past and something that he'll never have the opportunity to experience. He really feels like he's missing out now that a war has started in America, and he's not part of it yet. So he feels like he's missing out. For Henry, it's not a major patriotic sense that drives him to the field or a political understanding. It's more of this longing to see the elephant, as some of the soldiers called it, or to not miss out on the moment of his era. And that did motivate a lot of young soldiers. Certainly there were other factors, and really the motivations varied individual to individual. But I think it's a great example that we see this young man just worried that he's going to miss out, and that's his motivation for wanting to enlist. Now, his enlistment puts a big impact on his home. We don't know in the story if he has any siblings. We're not told that. His father is gone, but from his mother's words, we hear that his father was a good man who didn't drink. and Henry is now the man of the household. So his departure to go join the army puts a big strain on the farm. And in fact, his mother keeps him from enlisting for a little while by telling him that he's needed there on the homestead. Well, he tells her he's going, and he wants a big send-off scene, something inspired by the romantic tales of the era, maybe something out of Sir Walter Scott, with chivalry and knighthood and honor and duty and country and all of that. Well, his send-off speech from his mother actually turns out to be warnings about staying out of bad company, an admonition not to shirk his duty on the battle line because of her, which is a very fascinating statement. And then she also tells him to send home his socks when they need to be mended. And it's just a really human aspect. And just that reminder and that strain that we see as the young men went to war. It's going to be the women, it's going to be their families left behind who are having to do the extra chores and handle the management of a business, or in this case, a farm. Now, Henry joins up with a regiment, and from the way the story unfolds, the regiment's never been in battle before. So they are a green regiment in 1863. And that has a big impact. They talk about their training and how he spent the winter just drilling and being marched around, and how he didn't really like that. So these regiments had to get ready to go into battle. Usually the other regiments in the brigade, if they were veteran regiments, you would have that conversation, that sometimes teasing, sometimes mild insults, waiting to see how the new guys, the fresh fish, were going to perform in combat. And that could be a really big motivator for these new soldiers. They would want to prove themselves. And that's really how the first chapter of the book ends, with Henry wondering about the regiment, but also personally, will they be able to stand up in battle? That becomes the driving factor of the book. And it's a very personal conflict, but of course it broadens into the regimental sense as well. And that kind of leads us into looking at the concept of the regiment as we see it in the novel. So a full-strength Civil War regiment was supposed to be about 1,000 men. By 1863, it's pretty rare to find a 1,000-man regiment. Most have taken casualties and are not manning full-strength numbers. Stephen Crane doesn't give us a number. The regiment that Henry Fleming belongs to is fictional, which was very clever on the author's part. It breaks us away from having to scrutinize the story to see if the author got it historically correct, and lets us delve into the emotion and the experience that the story brings us. So when the regiment first goes into combat, Henry feels like the regiment as an entity has trapped him. He describes feeling like he is in a box, and that the box is going to keep him from running away. And at that point, he feels like he's been sent out to die, and that he had been tricked into enlisting, and he's frightened. And so he's coming up with reasons of why he is not supposed to be there, but yet the regiment has him trapped. Well, spoiler alert, Henry runs. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But when he comes back, spoiler alert again, he then starts to get a new sense of the regiment. So his second day of fighting, he begins to feel the bonds of brotherhood that is born in battle. And that's really something that we see in Civil War soldiers' writings. They talk about, my comrades are there, so I will fight for them. And this, of course, is a theme that we see in almost all wars and the primary sources from those conflicts. So it's interesting how that sense of regiment changes. And he comes to have a sense of belonging rather than that feeling of imprisonment. Now, one of the big parts of the novel is cowardice and fear. So I pulled a few quotes by real Civil War soldiers, not the fictional ones in the novel, but real Civil War soldiers, to give us an idea of how the guys in the 1860s were responding to this. So this first one comes from a Confederate soldier. He's actually a captain in the 39th North Carolina. And he talks about his experience in battle. He says, quote, "I was badly scared. I am not as brave as I thought I was. I never wanted out of a place as bad in my life." Sounds kind of similar to what is reflected in Henry's experience. Now, a Union soldier actually has the experience of a comrade displaying cowardice in battle. And this is what he wrote. "I'm sorry to say that Norman Hart is a coward. He ran away from the company just as we were going under fire the first day. I tell you, I do hate a coward. I am a big enough coward myself, but will never desert in a trying time, so help me God." Now, one of the reasons that men said they wouldn't run away from a regiment was they feared the shaming that they would get from their comrades. And that's certainly reflected in Henry's experience. He only goes back to the regiment once he has what he can pass off as a wound. So that's pretty significant. Another thing to consider is a lot of the regiments, or at least the companies, are recruited from hometowns. So if you're a coward and your buddies in the regiment or company know about that, the word's going to trickle back to your hometown, and that could have a significant repercussions in what would happen in your community standing and community position. So what happened to soldiers who fled and were then caught? I turned to James McPherson's book, For Cause and Comrades, and I wanted to share a paragraph out of there because it really illustrates what was the things that would happen. And this is taking a Union perspective. Confederates had other ways of dealing with their deserters. "A slightly more subtle way to compel unwilling soldiers to fight was to court-martial cowards and shame them publicly. Both armies applied this method to officers and enlisted men alike. A soldier in the 147th Pennsylvania wrote home after Chancellorsville, which was that regiment's first battle, that, quote, 2 captains have resigned, also a lieutenant, on the strength of charges being preferred against them for cowardice," end quote. A private in the veteran unit, the 2nd Minnesota, boasted that there are few cowards here, and that those that are drummed before the regiment on dress parade. There were several variations of this process. A corporal in the 1st Minnesota Regiment noted in his diary that, quote, "The provost guard of our division passes through the different camps, drumming out a man said to belong to the 20th Massachusetts Volunteers. The prisoner had a board tied to his back labeled coward." Another soldier, this one from the 1st Minnesota Regiment itself, he was sentenced to a year of hard labor for, quote, "misbehavior before the enemy." So there was definitely repercussions, and that's what Henry's fearing. And of course, that drives quite a bit of the story. Now, on the other side is the idea of fighting for each other. And again, I'm going to turn to For Cause and Comrades by James McPherson for another examples of this idea of coming together, fighting for each other as a unit, which is what Henry experiences when he goes back and determines to fight. The significance of the bonding became clear in combat. A veteran of the 122nd New York tried to explain how it worked. His sister asked what kept him going through the carnage of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and Petersburg. "You ask me if the thought of death does not alarm me," he replied. "I will say I do not wish to die. I am as big a coward as any could be," he admitted in July 1864. "But give me the bullet before the coward when all my friends and companions are going forward. Once and once only was I behind when the regiment was under fire, and I can't describe my feelings at that time. None can tell them, only a soldier. I was not able to walk, But as soon as the rattle of musketry was heard and I knew my regiment was engaged, I hobbled on the field and went to them. The untrained and old soldier are different in many respects. As to life, the new one looks out for himself in or out of battle. The old one, when away from his companions, thinks of them and goes in, and the danger to himself is forgotten. I think it's really fascinating how we can find examples from real Civil War soldiers and veterans about their war experience and see how that is blended into parts of Henry Fleming's experience in Red Badge of Courage. Now, there's one more point that I'd like to share that really just highlights a key part toward the end of the novel. And this is when Henry's come back to the regiment, he's fighting, they're making a charge, and all of a sudden, the color bearer, the flag bearer of his regiment is shot. And there is this great moment in the book where Henry and his friend Wilson they're both fighting over who's going to carry the flag. And it says at one point that each wanted the other to be the one, but neither wanted to give it up. In the end, Henry grabs the flag. I guess he pulls a bit harder and Wilson gives it to him. And the flag becomes an inspiration for Henry, and he sees it as this figure of protection, this figure worth fighting for, worth carrying into battle, worth dying for. He kind of gives it female qualities, almost maybe like a mother. At one point, he calls the flag a goddess. So he's definitely seeing it as something to protect, but also something that will keep him safe. And I pulled a quote by a Union officer from 1864, and he's describing seeing his regimental flag in the battle smoke, and this is what he says. "It is impossible to describe the feelings one experiences at such a moment. God, country, love, home, pride, conscious strength and power all crowd your swelling breast. Proud as a man can feel over this victory of our arms. If it were a man's privilege to die when he wished, he should die at such a moment." And that's quite similar to the way Henry starts to respond to the flag and just all of the feelings that it brings to him in that moment of charge and as he's carrying the flag and wanting to protect it. So those are just a few of the observations and connections of the real common soldier's experience, and as that is reflected in fictional character Henry Fleming's experiences in Stephen Crane's novel, The Red Badge of Courage. There are other examples, but we're going to be out of time here. We want to get on with the rest of the evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Be safe and have a wonderful rest of the evening. Thanks.